Live from his home studio in Illinois, please welcome the host of You Want Answers, Jason Rum.
Well, hello there, community. Welcome to this latest episode of You Want Answers. I am your host, as Peter so amazingly stated, and we got a great show for you today. I've got an amazing guest, one of our solutions engineers, Fred McFeeters, and we're going to talk about not persistence, which is how I built the show. If you saw the promotions earlier this week, my apologies. I've had a week with a lot of stuff going on, and it took me 2 days to even recognize the fact that, hey, that says persistence, and we're talking about precedence. So anyway, we're going to bring Fred on here in a minute. We're going to talk about precedence, and it's going to be amazing. For those of you who are joining us, maybe for the first time, You Want Answers has always been a 30-minute show, but even DevCentral Connects, which we do every other week, is also scrolling back to 30 minutes a week. So we hope to be a little bit more focused, bring a lot more energy, and then get out so you guys can get back to doing what you do. And so we have Fred on first. We're going to talk about precedence, not persistence. Then we got a little video clip, something I learned a couple weeks ago on a new version of Today I Learned about Python variables, and then I'll address a question that was asked on an older You Want Answers in the comments on self IPs, and then we'll get you out of here. So, without further ado, I'm going to bring my my peer Fred McFeeters on. Fred, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. How is everybody here?
Fantastic. And so I understand you were at your very first meeting of peers in 2 years. Is that right?
Yes, very exciting time. Finally getting back together, getting to see people. It's just really exciting to see everyone face to face again after 2 years almost.
That's crazy. Yeah, that's exciting. I think John and I went on a user group tour of Cincinnati and Indianapolis and I think Columbus, and it was January, maybe February of last year. So, it's been almost 18 months since I've been out on the road too. So that's exciting. And anyway, so we're going to talk about precedence. And there was an internal thread, maybe, was it a month ago, 3 weeks ago, something like that?
It was about a month ago.
Okay.
We were working on this.
Yeah. And so I thought that, part of the You Want Answers show is building up skills for certification and really dialing in understanding of core concepts, and precedence and persistence are some of those core concepts. We're going to talk about precedence. And so the exercise that you went through, I thought would be helpful to the community. So welcome, and what do you have for us?
All right. Well, so just talk for 1 second about what I was trying to accomplish and why I was trying to accomplish that. Is the main thing I was trying to accomplish was preventing any device in the network from choosing its own DNS server and bypassing any DNS security that I have. As many will know, almost all command and control runs through DNS, and having secure DNS is the most critical thing you can do to protect your environment. And so the first thing I did was try to set up a catch-all host. So we zeroed out the destination and only listen on port 53. So any packet that came on to port 53 in the F5 was expected to be routed to a specific virtual server. And I don't know if I can share my screen here. If we can, I can kind of bring the big IP up, and we'll just show real quick what we were going to be doing, what I had up here.
Yeah, well, go ahead. Share
is everyone
able
to see my screen now?
No, you need to share it at the bottom. Click share and then share screen. And then once you get it into the background, I can pull it onto the show.
Okay, perfect. Okay, there we go. Does that square?
Nope.
Share my screen here. Do apologize for this, everybody.
That is all right. That's one of the things about being on the road. You're not with your normal tools and your extra screens, and it happens.
What?
So while you're doing that, I'm gonna say hi to a couple people. Boo, what's up? How you doing? And also, with Precedence, we can share a couple links out on the chat. I can bring up as well. Give me a second.
Yeah, I apologize. Chrome is making me, and my MacBook's making me do some security settings here. So that's, sorry about that.
Not a problem at all. Actually, I don't have that queued up on mine. Well, this makes for some fantastic live. I apologize, guys. I'm not as well prepared as I should be, and it's all good. Oh, we lost Fred altogether. He'll be back here in a second. Why don't we move on, and we'll talk about self-IPs, and we'll come back to it. Or actually, I'm going to go ahead and play our Today I Learned, and then we will jump back in with Fred here in just a second. Hello. Today I learned about a nuance with Python variables that I thought I'd share. And so, if I set x here to equal to 1, or I'm sorry, the list with an element of 1, and then I make a copy of that list, then if I check the IDs, you can see the IDs are the same. That part I know. And that, if you're just making a reference to another object, then those are both referencing the same object. However, if I look at the elements of that list in each one, they're both the same here. They both have 1. But then if I run this command, which is like I'm adding the element of 2 to that list with the kind of a standard x equals x plus, and then the element of that list. If I look at those IDs again, the x changed, but we did not bring along the copy of x. It did not update that one, which I thought was interesting. And now you can see here down below, x is equal to the update, x, the copy of x is not. And so the interesting nuance there is if I come over to this tab, I have the same things in here. But instead of doing the x equals x plus an element of 2, I'm using the shorthand, which is x plus equals the list element of 2. And in that way, you can see that it did bring x, the copy of x, along for the ride, and we have the same object was updated. X did not create a new object. X just updated that reference, and then the copy of x did as well. And so you can see both of those objects here were updated, and they both have the same reference. And of course, normally when you add elements to a list, you probably do an append anyway. So maybe that's not a great example, but just the nuance of using x equals x plus versus x plus equals, the behavior of that is different. It's not just shorthand. So in Python anyway. Thought that was interesting. Wanted to share. If you have something to share, hit us up in the community, DevCentral at f5.com, and we'd love to share that on our weekly live stream, DevCentral Connects, at 12:30 Pacific every week. Have a good one. All right, Fred, you're back, and we have a screen.
And we have a screen. Security at all of its finest. So kind of where I left off is I had recreated this virtual server here in F5. We call these wildcard virtual servers, where we set the address to zeroed out. So it will listen and literally accept a connection on any address, no matter what it's sent to. And I went ahead and specified port 53. So my goal here when I set this up was I expected all traffic destined to port 53 for DNS to hit this virtual server. And so I had a machine up to test this. And when I would come in and I would say, all right, well, let's go ahead and run a test here. And so I would run this test. And I am getting back an IP address here for this domain. That's not what I expected. Because I'm getting an IP address, I know for sure that it is able to successfully reach out and communicate with Google and provide this answer.
Okay, yeah, so go ahead.
Out to try to troubleshoot this and try to figure out, well, what might have been going wrong. And so the first thing I did, of course, was come into the big IP and start a packet capture. So I only have one screen, so I'm just going to minimize and run this request and come right back here. So we'll run this request, and then we'll come right back to this other screen over here. And what I saw was that the big IP is kind enough, if you're using TCP dump on the big IP, maybe not if you're using WinSCP on the wire, but on the big IP itself, it will literally tell you what virtual server was receiving this traffic. And I was seeing that all the traffic was hitting this forwarding virtual server here, which is this server right here. This server here is designed to be the server that directs all traffic from this black hole VLAN I have out to the internet or wherever it needs to go, which really confused me. I was looking here and I say, well, they're both any address, but this one has a more specific port address. So this should have been getting the traffic. I wasn't sure. Why was this not getting traffic?
Right, because by the rules of precedence, right, the more specific should match, right?
That's right. And I was reached out to the team, and the team had kind of mentioned that, well, maybe it's the source address. And I got a little bit confused thinking about that. I was thinking that, where they were talking about the VLAN, I'm like, well, how would it ever work if it's always tagging the VLAN? Because if I look at this virtual server, I'm like, yes, it's listening on this VLAN always. And so, that can't be the problem.
Right.
And so we went through a little bit back and forth. And because we lost a little bit of time on here, I'll save some of that troubleshooting. But it come to find out that there was this field right here, this source address field. And this source address field here says that it requires for this virtual server to be hit to traffic to be coming from this address. And if we went back and we looked at my DNS virtual server, it doesn't have anything here, right? It says any source address and any destination address.
Right.
And when we started looking at the actual K articles and the documentation for what the precedence was, we see that the precedence for the service port actually comes in second to the precedence of the actual source address. So if I would have went back here, and we'll go back to this virtual server, if I would go back to this server and remove this so that it now has 0, so just like the DNS one, now these are would be both equal virtual servers.
Right.
Here, and I will push this change out here. Give me 1 second here to do that. All right, so now if we come back to our big IP, our guest VM here, and we rerun that same query, I'm getting the proper response. And again, the reason for that, it wasn't necessarily clear to me right away, even looking at the documentation, was just very specifically because we had that source address listed here, it was always first, and it was listed first, and that changed that precedence.
Right.
So finding this out, through a little bit of troubleshooting, it took several emails back and forth, but we have a great team here, and someone was able to point this out. And there was a command on the F5 that just would have made it a little bit clearer to see. And that is just if we would have went in here and did a listing of this virtual server. And now it's quite clear here to see that I've already zeroed it out. But before, that's exactly what they pointed out. As soon as I ran that, they were like, well, Fred, have you considered that this source might take precedence over the actual port? And then there was a K article that we could probably share that was pointed out to me.
Yeah, I think that's 8009. Is that it? The order of precedence.
And I do believe so. I had it pulled up before we jumped on here, but I had to close Chrome and I lost that link.
Yeah. So we'll get that. We'll get that at the end of the show. I'll put that in the description at the end. But K8009 is another gotcha with virtual servers, and that's the tm.continue matching database variable, and that's the one where if you have things that you want to be listening and it's unavailable, it won't go down to the next one to match. So by default. And so if you want it to hit another one that it would match other than the one that it matched first and is blocking, then you need to set that variable to true. And that's like another little switch that adds to the complexity of how all this stuff works. And so, the experience that you went through, you don't know until you know. And so learning all the nuances of how the product works and building out, your own tribal knowledge, it's good to, especially in nuances that aren't even documented yet. And face it, that happens sometimes. It happens with our products. It happens with other people's products. And so the more we can get tribal knowledge into documented knowledge, the better off we all are. And so, so anyway, from a standpoint of, your experience, my takeaways from that would be, don't be afraid to reach out, because, that's why we're all here. We're all here to help each other and get to a solution. And then, knowing your features definitely helps to isolating problems more quickly. But sometimes you don't know until you know. And so it's getting down that road. But anyway, Fred, thank you so much for joining us today. And sorry about the technical problems. It happens. I totally understand. And, hopefully we'll have a chance to chat in the future as you learn more things, as we all learn more things. The more we can share, the better off we all are.
Thank you again.
All right. Appreciate it. And enjoy your time with your team. That's amazing that you get to be in person. All right. So we've already played the Today I Learned about my Python variable experience. So we're just going to move into this next section, and we're going to talk about self-IPs. I got a question about self-IPs. It was probably a couple weeks ago, maybe right after my last You Want Answered. And they were just asking about, going into, how they work and what more we could say about them. So I have some things that we will work through, and let me find my notes. First of all, we're just going to do a little big IP investigation here. My super secret admin security. Sarah, I noticed you mentioned a little bit ago, we don't mess around with system or browser updates around here, and I'm guessing that's the problem that Fred was having, that he just couldn't get it to share without shutting down and bringing it back on, and that happens. So yes, we take our security very seriously around here, especially me and my admin password. Thankfully, it's on my laptop. I'm the only one that touches this thing, and it has no routes to go anywhere, so I think I'm safe. But that said, I'm going to come over here to the network tab, and we're going to talk about this little thing called the self IP. And this is my list of self IPs on my lab box. I've got 3 of them. I have 3 different VLANs on my device. .3 is my external, .4 is my internal, and then I have an internet-facing one that's my internal network that allows me to do some things on Big IP in my own network. So, and anyway, to create a self IP, you go to this fancy little window, and you would, name, IP address, net mask, all that is well understood. You can also apply to a VLAN or a tunnel. If I had a VLAN group established, I could attach a self IP to a VLAN group. And for those that don't know what a VLAN group is, that's where you can take 2 layer 2 VLANs, kind of merge them together and create an L3 bridge across those. We have that functionality. By and large, I don't. It is not something that I recommend for the faint of heart, because there's just so much complexities with bridging. But to each his own. And then you have this port lockdown functionality here, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. We have traffic group, which is for if you have high availability systems configuration, you can create your non-floating self IP, which will be bound to that virtual Big IP or chassis, or whatever flavor that is. But then you have the ability to create a floating one too, and that floating one will be to whatever traffic group is established. So if you have 2 devices, normally you would only have 1 traffic group. But if you have 3, 4, 5, you may have 3 to 5 traffic groups, so that each one is primary on a certain number of traffic. And so that's where the traffic group would come into play. And then you have the service policy, which is related to the firewall product that you can add. We won't go into the service policy. We won't go into service policy today. But the thing we are going to talk about is port lockdown, and that we'll spend the most amount of time there, because that's the one that probably is where most of the questions around self-IPs come. And there's different behaviors depending on what version you're on. By and large, everybody should be on 12.1 forward, although I'll give another ask and plead for everyone to get to 14.1 or forward. You're going to have the most stability, performance, and security by getting to 14.1 plus. So if you're not there yet, do everything you can to get there soon. And most of the base system behaviors haven't changed a whole lot since 14 forward. So most of the stuff that we'll talk about will apply to 14.1 forward, whereas you might have to go back to some of these earlier versions on 10x, 11x, and then even back to 9x. If you're still on 9x, I'm impressed. I'm really impressed. But the port lockdown behavior is, it seems kind of like it would just make common sense that you set up an access list. Like if you're building out a router or a switch, and say, I'm going to allow this, I'm going to deny this, and everything works as it should. But there are some implicit allowances on self-IPs that maybe some people aren't aware of, and those come into mirroring. And so when we talked about your floating situation with high availability, there are ports from 1029 forward, and I think it goes all the way to 1155, that if you have an HA system established, that those ports are going to be allowed implicitly, as well as if you have HA established, TCP 4353 is used for CMI, even though it's not iQuery. So if you have that established, any interface that you have used for your device grouping is going to allow 4353, even if on that self IP you have not allowed it. So if you're also using iQuery for that doesn't need to be in your custom list, because it's already going to allow it. However, being one who loves to be explicit about everything, I would still add it, even though it's going to be allowed implicitly. And then, of course, ICMP as well is going to be an implicit allowance. There's one thing over in the self IP that I did not actually know until today. And this is when you create an auto-mapped SNAT, the big IP system, what it's doing on the back end, it's actually creating a SNAT pool consisting of all the system's internal self IP addresses. And then it uses an algorithm to select and assign an address from that SNAT pool. Now, by and large, if you're auto mapping and going back to a system, that's going to select the self IP of that VLAN, but it might select one of another VLAN, which might not be all that awesome if you don't have routes back through those other paths back to your front door where your SNAT address is. So got to be careful about that. But it does its best to assign with that algorithm the ones that make the most sense. So that was a new thing. And then, for mirroring the behaviors between port lockdown allowing of default, when you say you're allowed default, it's going to allow TCP 1029 to 1043 for mirroring. So you have the ability to lock down your ports, and I highly suggest you do. But you also need to know that there are some services that are allowed implicitly. I know when we had the way back with the WAM module, the ability to set up IPsec tunnels between self IPs. There were also some implicit ports in there as well that you did not need to put into your custom allow list. So if you're doing security scans, if you are doing anything for establishing trust for your device to put into your network. Knowing that information about what port lockdown does and doesn't do is going to be necessary when you're filling out your forms as to why these ports are available, even though you have locked them down to not allow them. So, from a security audit perspective, you need to know those things. And that information is out here on Ask. And yeah, so the other thing I'll say about self-IPs before we get ready to get out of here today is that this question comes out a lot in Q&A on DevCentral. It's like, hey, I'm trying to ping my self-IPs and I can't. And so, by and large, that's not something that is going to be successful. There are situations where it will work and situations where it won't. The details for that are in K3475. Basically, if you're in VLAN, you won't have a problem pinging your self-IP. If you're pinging from other VLANs that are connected directly to your big IP, there are some situations that they note here in the bottom where the result will be successful or not. And so you can go read those details and then go forward. So that is self-IPs. If I missed something that you really want to know, hit me up in the comments and we can have a dialogue about that asynchronously in chat. And for next week, before we get out of here, where'd my notes go? I had some notes and I've lost them. I do not see them anywhere. That's all right. We're going to go off the hip, as seems to be the case with this show today. So I want to thank you for sticking with us first and foremost, because we had some technical problems and that happens sometimes, and we just pushed through. Always appreciate you being here. We do have some amazing shows coming up in August. Next week, 12:30 Pacific on Thursday, we're going to wrap Black Hat. Black Hat starts, I think, today and runs through the weekend and all the way to next Thursday. So there's a lot going on. Black Hat Security Conference. There's always some crazy stuff that comes out of Black Hat. I just couldn't even begin to think through all the scary and jaw-dropping stuff that goes on out there. And so we'll be back to talk about some of that next week. And then 2 weeks from today, John will be here with another episode, an outstanding episode of Security Sidebar. And then August 19th, we're going to do a lab day, and we'll have an amazing time with that. It'll be an abbreviated one. Maybe we'll just walk through some lab steps of a particular technology, and we haven't landed on exactly what we're going to do, but it's going to be fun, and we'll hope you guys will join us in that experience. And then finally, August 26th, we have Nginx Sprint Recap. And Nginx Sprint is the virtual conference that we just get together and talk all things Nginx, whether it's the open source all the way through Nginx controller and the Nginx Plus. So we'll have a lot to talk about on that day. So anyway, we are at time. Thank you so much for joining us this week. Don't forget to subscribe, and we will see you out there in the community. Thanks, and have a great weekend.